law matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this program was created to educate, inform, and help you understand legal matters, which in turn will help you decide how to protect yourself, your family, and your business. We continue to provide information and resources that may help you manage some issues yourself, or of course you'll be better prepared with whatever professional counsel you seek. Our goal, of course, is to help you save time, money, and achieve the best possible results. As always, we want to once and again welcome David Bazar from Bazar & Associates Law Firm in East Providence. And today, David and I, would like to welcome our special guest, Kevin Folan, who is head of School of Providence Country Day in East Providence. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a private school, as I understand, in East Providence, about 200 kids from middle school and high school?
That is correct. Grades 6 through 12.
Good. We're looking forward to hearing your perspective on some of these critical issues. Let's start off with David, because today we're going to be discussing the reopening of school. It's been hitting the headlines locally and nationally, so we thought we must address it as we've been addressing other COVID-related issues lately. There's a litany of legal issues that are looming for schools as teachers and staffers and parents all scramble to prepare their kids for their kids' education this September. So who's liable during this COVID circumstances? Who's liable for what? To what extent? Is compliance, 100% compliance, even feasible? Never mind how much it costs. Their liability shields, as we talked about in previous sessions. How do you manage the costs? How do you manage the logistics? How do you make the decisions? How do you handle the split sessions and the in-school and the remote learning and the labs and chemistry and on the field and school sports? A host of things. Controversies abound. We're going to see if we can tackle some of these issues. So David, let's begin with you. As of this, which is mid-August, what's the current situation, knowing that we've discussed so many times how many are liable if they didn't do everything that the day's guidelines have said? What's the status now?
So just like all of the other types of cases we've discussed, we've talked about, is there medical malpractice liability in this? It's a whole new world, and people and schools and anybody else operating in this new world just has to act as any normal, reasonable person would under the circumstances. So to find the Providence Public Schools liable because they reopen and somebody goes to school and gets sick, and if you can even prove that it has anything to do with the school, I could not see any liability for that as long as they're following what a reasonable school would do. So liability in these types of situations, I think, are still going to be difficult because it's hard to track. You can track, but it's hard to track exactly where people contract the virus from. Schools are just learning and trying to figure out how to do these things, and you have to weigh and balance the need to protect and be healthy and not get sick, and having children and parents be able to have their children in school because there's an emotional and a physical need to be in school. So it's a balance that we can only try to achieve as best we can given all the circumstances as they arise. So I don't see liability as being a real issue in the reopening of schools. I think it's more of a balance of how you can get children and teachers safely in school and balance it with what's going on.
So before we get to Kevin and addressing the private school issue, we had also talked about COVID relative to how we would be able to hold anybody liable unless there were contact tracing throughout. Doesn't seem like that's going to be possible within public schools, never mind private schools that we need to, and I guess that's still the case, is it not?
It is, and that's what I'm saying. But even with contact tracing, and we could tell exactly where every little thing blossomed from and was transmitted from, again, we talked about this with restaurants. The restaurants follow the guidelines, they do what they have to do, they go above and beyond, they clean, they disinfect, they do what is expected of a reasonable restaurateur under the circumstances, and someone gets COVID and they can trace it there. It's not like food poisoning. It's you know, it's a new world. We know with food poisoning how to handle food and what the requirements are and the temperatures in the refrigerators and the freezers and the cooking of food. This is not like that.
I know you've often referred to the standard of care. One other quick question on the legal front. I understand it's recommended at the state and federal governments provide the resources to help schools take care of whatever the PPE requirements, the masks, the cleaning facilities, and the, I don't know, whatever the upgrades need to be, managing to rearrange the classrooms or whatever. Is it the government's, local or federal's, governmental responsibility to foot the bill for this on the one hand so that the schools can't be sued for noncompliance on the other hand?
Well, it's more than just that. There is a cost to it.
Sure.
And in order for especially public school districts that are struggling as it is financially to be able to do what needs to be done, you would expect that there would be some federal government help.
Sounds right. So let's jump over to Kevin. So explain to us, as of this taping anyway, and we do know that it's a moving target as it is, you work with a private school. Tell us about the status now and how you arrive at your considerations or your decisions to handle this.
Sure. Well, and I'm glad you said right now with the taping of this, because who knows what's going to happen an hour from now.
True.
Because if we had met 2 days ago, right, as we know, Governor Raimondo just made an announcement to push back the start of schools. And even though private and independent schools don't necessarily need to follow the public school mandate, we want to be good citizens. We want to be responsive and responsible for our students, for my employees, and also for our parents. And so it was really important for us to listen to some of the concerns that Governor Raimondo outlined and which of those concerns apply to us and which ones didn't. I mean, frankly, at Providence Country Day School, all that we've been doing for the last 4 months has been preparing for the opening of school on September 2nd. And all of the guidelines, all the mandates that we have observed, we can meet those in large part because we have a pretty big campus. We have 94,000 square indoor feet. We have 30 acres of campus, and then we also have, as you said, about 200 students. So we can already de-densify and we can spread out. So I think that already puts us at an advantage of being able to open safely and responsibly.
What happens on the sports front? Every kid wants to play football, whatever, their soccer. Can that happen?
Well, that's also a great question. So on campus this summer, we have been having Connie Mack baseball. We've also been having soccer clubs using some of our spaces. So youth sports have been operating. And frankly, it's been wonderful because we believe it's really important for kids to be outside, to be engaged socially,
Sure.
and to be physically fit. In terms of competitive sports for the fall, it's still to be determined because we're not operating, again, in a vacuum. We're waiting to hear from the Rhode Island Interscholastic League what they want to do. They've let us know that by September 14th, they plan on coming out with a decision. I think independent of what they are going to do, we still want to have athletic offerings for our students. So we will have practices run by our coaches, skills, drills, intramurals. We hope that we can play against other schools, but we at least think that it's important for kids to have the opportunity to play sports on campus.
So while you've done what you can do for your facility, for the institution, the facility such as it is, you can't you can anticipate, you can't know right now how every parent is going to feel. What contingencies do you have for the parents who aren't quite comfortable with the fact that you can space them, you can hand out the masks, hopefully enforce it? Some may say, well, my child has this situation, or I'm afraid of the families being compromised for that. How do you handle that? Or what are the thoughts?
Well, we handle it delicately because
Yes.
even though we have a much smaller student body, we still have 200 different families with different opinions,
Certainly.
very strong opinions on this subject. And so it's important for us to one, ask them, where do you stand? So lots of virtual town halls, lots of surveys, lots of, frankly, individual conversations trying to discern what is the best individual approach for each family. And so it's really trying to design almost 4 different school years. What's it like if we're fully remote? What's it like if we're fully in person? Or 2 of these different scenarios where there's some percentage of kids who are on site. But we already know that even if we can open in person on September 2nd, there's going to be at least a handful of our families who have said, for one reason or another, I do not want my child on campus. And so then the burden is on us to make sure that those kids can still participate in a hybrid model. And so the way that we're doing it is we've committed to the Zoom video platform. And so if I'm a math teacher, I'm going to be teaching some kids in person. And we also have some cameras and other technology set up so that little Johnny or Susie can still attend class from the comfort of their home.
David, from a legal standpoint, is there any issue about how parents make this decision about whether their kids are physically in school or just decide to opt out? Some, I understand, have very strong concerns just because they need to go to work and they need to have their child there. But suppose others say, I'm home, I want to keep my child at home, we want to make sure, or we want to force, can they force every school system in the district to make provisions to teach that child, private or public?
I think right now every school system is actually gearing up to be able to offer that option. And as you're doing it at Country Day, the children who want to, or students that want to stay at home, their parents want them at home, will have a regular class day, because when they're taking Algebra 1 or whatever it is, and the students at school are taking it, they would be taking it at the same time with the camera live streaming the teacher and doing it as if they were there. Correct?
That's correct.
So I think given the world the way it is today, you have to respect people's decisions, and I don't think there's any legal issue at all if a parent right now says, I feel, given our personal circumstances, more comfortable having their child take their classes under that situation.
What happens with the stimulus, which is up in the air as of this taping? Again, another moving target, such as it is, but parents were having money for keeping their child at home. Some who are I or DD, intellectually or developmentally disabled, are sometimes being paid now because they are the only supports for their child at home. There's another Flexible Family Coronavirus Response Act. I think you can find that out at dol.gov, the specifics of it. Are parents going to be losing their money or unable to actually access that as a resource based on some of their decisions now?
So the act that you just referenced, I think, is similar to the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, or the Family Leave Act, and it doesn't apply to every employer. And I think there's a size issue, less than 50 and that type of thing. But it does provide for some flexibility. So as you said, if the federal government decides to keep additional unemployment benefits in place and your employer doesn't get dinged for you not going back to work, which is one of the things they always did under this situation, if it works and someone wants to stay at home and keep their child at home, there are certainly a lot of different laws in place that may allow for that to happen.
And what about your teachers? Let's talk about teachers a little bit. There are many teachers who say, under no circumstances am I going in because of COVID. Have you been interacting with your teachers throughout the summer to see how where their temperature is?
Sure.
Figuratively, literally on this.
So I've had to walk that line between being in touch with my teachers, but also recognizing that this is their time off. So I don't want to
Good point.
overschedule them this summer. Again, we've had a series of virtual town meetings with our faculty and staff to really hear their concerns. What are the things that are most pressing for them? What are the things that we can put into place to help mitigate some of these risks? What will help them feel more comfortable to come back on campus? And a lot of it is, can we provide for the physical and social distancing? Are we going to require masks? Yes, of course. Are we going to provide face shields and other PPE for all of our employees? And unfortunately, at the end of the last school year, there were some of our more veteran teachers who opted to retire, which was unfortunate. And I think this is one of the difficult impacts of COVID-19.
So you're in the private sector, maybe you don't have the same kind of issues that public schools and labor union issues that others have. I understand that there's a very strong lobbying effort right now because there are so many teachers who are being affected. Is that going to impact on how schools are going to be opening too? I guess this is an issue for David. Do you find that teachers are waiting for their organizations to say, no, you really don't have to go, you can stay home, while all of these lobbying efforts are underway, but no legislation's been passed yet?
So yeah, that's going to be an ongoing situation with public schools and teacher unions and the school administration to try to figure out you have three issues really. The need to get students back in school and have a somewhat normal experience or as close as you can to that under what's going on today. You have the teachers who are concerned about their health and staying safe, but also who probably very much want to make sure that they can provide the best education to the children who are their students. And then you have the concern of the parents, and both the concern of the parents who want their children back in school because they think that's best for them, those who want their children at home because they think they need to protect them from what's going on, and those who need to work and have that concern. So it's balancing all of those kinds of things. So that's going to play out. Kevin has done a really good job of communicating with all of those folks over the summer and trying to find that balance between what works for the teachers, what works for the parents, and what's best for the students.
So it seems that the boundaries change with every report that comes out. It seems that everyone is still trying to reconfigure classrooms. Everyone is talking about the importance of transparency. Clearly, you've made some indication that that you're trying to communicate with the parents, with the teachers. Do you expect that that's going to continue throughout the semester or the year, whatever the semester and the year ends up being?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I've realized over the last 6 months is that there was this kind of archaic notion that a leader needs to have all the answers. And I think in this current environment right now, just trying to be humble with, look, I'm trying to stay a couple steps ahead of you. I'm dealing with the same information as you. There has to be a partnership here. And can we figure out some creative solutions together? And I'm fortunate to be part of a community where the parents and the teachers and the administration, again, it's not perfect, but boy, we are working hard together.
So certainly everyone talks about the wonders of transparency. That could happen everywhere across all of the school systems. You are not under the same auspices of as the public schools. You don't have to follow what a governor says. Our governor in this case in Rhode Island, but other private schools, do they not have to fall under the same banner or net that Governor Baker or whomever is casting?
That's correct, but I think we also want to make sure that we're not just going it alone. What I've seen the last 6-7 months is just a tremendous amount of collaboration amongst other independent schools and also the public sector, where we are all trying to figure out what is the best way for us to serve our communities. And I know, different points this week, I was on Zoom calls, phone calls with superintendents, with RIDO, and then also with other private school leaders, trying to figure out what does all of this mean collectively, and then how can we help make sure that our communities are going to be served adequately.
It's probably, you're certainly in a different place because you're representing a private school, but the costs are extraordinary for a school system. Even now, exponentially more costly as they try to retrofit these schools. I'm sure that it's affected you as well, but probably with more buffers or more cushions to deal with and probably some degree of flexibility. Is that safe and correct to say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah,
but you've had expenses. You purchased tents to be able to have classrooms outside. And,
that's right.
And other, the cameras and the technology to be able to live stream and all of that.
And again, as we were building out our budget for the current school year, we recognized that this COVID-19 situation was not just going to be something that went away in April or May of 2019, or rather 2020, but something that was going to be here for for the foreseeable future, really until there was a vaccine. And so we were prepared for some of these additional costs.
How do you expect that you will deal with the students themselves? Some of them don't comply or a little unhappy about whatever the new restrictions are going to be. Again, private school, you have a little bit different set of standards of how you can handle, and certainly the student-faculty ratio is different.
Sure.
What kinds of things are you expecting to deal with, and how do you plan to deal with the onslaught of kids when they
Sure.
walk through the doors with a different attitude and a new normal?
Yeah, and this has been a hot topic both with my teachers and also with parents. Kids are still going to be kids. And while on the one hand I agree with that, I think as teachers, our first job is to teach, to educate them on here is what we're doing and here is why. And from what I have observed, especially with my students, the kids understand. I mean, they are very smart, they are very, very savvy, they do want to comply, because ultimately they want to be back. And I'm just going to have to make it very clear that if we want to be back, we all have a role to play. You as students, us as teachers, and your parents. And even though I can't govern what you do on weekends or when you go home at night, if you are not following some of these best practices, that is going to have an impact on what we do. But after we educate and teach and remind students of what we need to do on site, the physical and social distancing, wearing masks, if there is just going to be non-compliance, then I think there's going to need to be conversations about, well, then maybe you can't be here on campus, maybe you need to attend class virtually. Which might sound a little bit mean or maybe draconian, but again, I just think in this current environment, we need to put everyone's health first.
Good point. So about the medical issues, every student, public school, private school, has some degree of their population that has medical issues. Some are more obvious and evident than others, but I assume that this is the time when every child who's had anything wrong with them, any illness, any possible underlying issue, it's going to be presenting itself fully come August 31st or September 14th or whatever the new date will be. Even though you are private and have a greater budget, do you feel confident right now in being able to accommodate whatever those new needs might be medically because of what's happening with COVID?
Yeah, so I think it's important for me to understand where am I an expert and where am I not an expert. I'm not a doctor, I don't have an MD, and so it's important with some of these families who are reaching out with some individual concerns about their child that we are part of a conversation with a team of experts who are going to advise. And sometimes the conversation is, child needs X, Y, and Z accommodations, can you provide for these? And again, it's just transparency. Yes, we can, or no, Debbie, we can't. And so when that happens, what can we do to make sure that this student education is still going to be served throughout the 2021 school year?
Good. And so, David, looking at the public school system and parents who have a right to have their children educated, suppose you know how difficult it's going to be to adapt every school, every district. What happens, do you expect that when parents come to you and say, David, the school isn't taking care of my child, he has this particular illness issue or whatever, the school's not complying. Do we sue them? Are you expecting that's going to happen, or is there going to be a shield to protect everyone against that?
Well, I think right now, given that every school system will have the capability of letting someone learn from home, and then someone comes in and says, I want my child at school, and I need them to do this, this, or that. If the accommodations are not reasonable, then the school just can't do it, but they're still going to be able to offer the education because they're going to say, yeah, you can do it, it just has to be virtual, and this is how it's going to happen. So I think there's actually more flexibility right now for schools to be able to offer, public schools, offer education and not be able to accommodate everything, given the fact that they have conditions at school that need to be met too, for the safety of everybody else.
So in the public school, let's hope every child has a Chromebook, Mac, laptop, whatever they need, and access to the internet. What happens if they don't? Is there going to be a legal battle?
Well, we've, I think, had the start of that already from the first time we were out of school. So they're going to have to figure that out. And if you're going to tell someone that they can learn from home, you're going to have to make sure that they're able to learn from home.
That would be that would be a lawsuit, I imagine, in and of itself, if there aren't those options.
Yeah.
How do you feel about there's an effort or an interest underway to prevent lawsuits from happening? I know you're a lawyer, David. You wouldn't ever want there not to be an opportunity for you to defend or prosecute someone.
Well,
What do you expect happens with that?
Frankly, I don't think it's the government's place to determine whether or not there can be a lawsuit. There are some circumstances where they do that, but there's a way of providing for a remedy. So I'm thinking, as we're talking about vaccines, there's actually an immunity for companies that have approved vaccines from being sued for their vaccines, and there's a vaccine court. There's actually a federal court that travels around. It's based in Washington, D.C. Everybody who has a vaccine, that you pay for the vaccine, a certain number of dollars goes to a fund, and if you're injured by the vaccine, you can sue, and it's a claim, actually, that's filed in the vaccine court. Guillain-Barre is something that happens with certain vaccines. I've had a client who went through that, and we made a claim, and he recovered. He didn't sue the people who made the vaccine because there's immunity. But to give blanket immunity for certain things, and now there was talk, we had talked about this at a show before about medical malpractice immunity for this. I don't think that's necessary, because I don't think medical malpractice claims are viable for most of this anyway, because it's new. And you can't hold somebody responsible for violating a standard of care when a standard of care doesn't even exist yet. So I think that's one example of where the government should stay away from trying to have blanket immunity, sort of like tort reform when they try to say you can't sue unless you have this, that, or the other thing for an injury. That's not where we need to be legislating. Let the courts handle that, and that's what judges are for.
Sounds good. Thanks, David. You started to refer to some of the things that PCD has done, tents and cameras. In the short amount of time that we have left, what other kinds of things have you had to do? Do you have to have a pulse oximeter? Do you have to have a thermometer for every kid who walks in the school, scan his forehead? How does that happen? What's going on?
So our plan right now is that we are going to ask every family to fill out a self-attestation form. You know, here are the symptoms. Is your child exhibiting any of these? And again, we are banking on the fact that people are going to be honest and that they are going to have integrity in filling these things out. We are not going to do the temperature checks on site. We are putting that burden on the parents.
Sounds reasonable.
But yes, with the tents,
hopefully.
I mean, especially September and October, you know, God willing, is there going to be some good weather? Let's get outside. Let's get into the fresh air. I think the science and the data points to the fact that the virus is much more difficult to contract when you're outdoors.
So you'll have outdoor classes, excuse me?
Yes, we are.
That's good, as long as the weather holds up. The tents for when it doesn't?
That's right.
Sounds like you've made some pretty good arrangements, as much as you can plan for things.
Look, with any of these obstacles and challenges in life, I mean, I think part of the excitement of my job is how do we turn these into opportunities? And so I'm thankful for my team that they've been really creative with coming up with some just remarkable solutions.
Kevin Folan from PCD, thank you for joining us. Thank you, David. We thank you for tuning in to The Law Matters. Please continue to stay tuned as we tell you it matters to you.